Hey everyone, welcome back to Getting In, a college coach conversation. I'm your host, Ian Fisher. We've got our last segment of the day today, and our focus here is on high achieving students. Not just high achieving students, but what parents can do in order to support their high achieving students. And joining me for this conversation is my colleague, DJ Meehan. Hey, DJ, welcome to the show.
Hey, good
So
to be here.
you have worked pretty closely with families in prior work at an independent school. You've seen a lot of high achieving students, both as a former admission officer and as a counselor here with College Coach and in your school. I want to just start just by thinking about what we're talking about when we say high achieving students and when we can start to identify that our students are in that bucket. So if I'm a parent, how do I know that I've got a high achieving student? And how early can I make that pronouncement?
It's a good question. Well, I mean, a high achieving student is going to be taking advantage, is going to be in sort of the highest track available, generally at their high school, right? Or in higher levels, maybe not in also across all subjects, but at least in most, if not all subjects. Um, and yeah, I mean, that's right. Like it's going to be sort of an academically sort of motivated student who might be looking at, right, selective admissions options, right, for college.
That's right.
Um, yeah, which is not all, but a small sliver, right, of college
Right. So,
options.
so typically schools we're talking about that are top 20, 25 most selective schools. That doesn't mean that these students are necessarily going to get into those schools because there are many high achieving students that do not. But it tends to be that the students that we would call high achieving are going to be targeting these schools. They're going to get mostly A's, if not all A's. They're going to be in the hardest classes, as you point out. What about outside of the classroom? Is there any component to extracurricular engagement or
Mm-hmm.
just general social disposition that is characteristic of a high achieving student, or are there all flavors of high achieving student in terms of personality?
I mean, I think they're all flavors, right? And that's the beauty of it. They're all flavors. Generally speaking, though, I think high achieving students outside of their academic life are busy, right? And whether that's through kind of more formal, sort of structured school involvements, athletics, the arts, or they're just working, and just like
Yeah.
being a great
Yeah.
student, and keeping busy. Um, that's sort of the prescription, right, for admission, to these sort of selective schools, is really sort of demonstrating a track record, of being the kind of young person who sort of takes initiative, who has been working intentionally on softer skills outside of the classroom, like leadership skills, formal leadership, like having titles, yes, in clubs and organizations, but also maybe being a great sibling, a responsible community member. Colleges want to get a sense. Selective schools want to get a sense of students' sort of character and engagement. Right? Is this somebody we want to have on our campus? And are they doing stuff, meaningful stuff with their time outside of the classroom? So um, that's the general profile. Always, again, though, all kinds of, I think, flavors and,
That's right.
and prescriptions, but just young people that are engaged. I used to say, only half facetiously, and I know a lot of gamers would like talk back to me about this, but I would colleges want to see a track record that when you have free time, you're not sitting around playing video games all the time. That
Right.
that there's a time and a space for that, right? But that there are other things in your life too um that are also meaningful, that you're willing to commit time to.
One of the things that I've observed about many of the high achieving students that I've worked with here is that they are certainly busy, but they're not necessarily stressed about that busyness. That doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that they don't get stressed and that they don't sometimes feel overwhelmed, but they also manage it really well. And it's something that fuels them, right? They get excited by that engagement. And I think it's really important for parents to understand making your kid busy doesn't make them high achieving, right? So if you're
Right.
saying we got to get more stuff on your calendar, you have too much idle time, that's not necessarily the recipe for success in this space. It's about finding the right kinds of activities that are motivating and stimulating for students.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And that could be getting a part-time job. Like that could be the kind of thing, right? Like that could be
Yeah,
doing something else. But I think once parents get into the job of prescribing, also there's just going to be natural pushback, right?
right. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
The medicine my mom told me I had to take. And that's not the lesson that we want students to take away from this experience in terms of thinking about their college application and being competitive for admission, right? The lesson is, right, we want you to kind of, you have this talent, you have these opportunities, you have this time, right? We want you to grow up to be a person who also, right, grows. These are habits that we want you to develop,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
Not just boxes that we want you to check for the sake of the admissions process. A lot of families ask about, community service, and they're out there like
Right.
forcing the
Right.
kid to do like the hour. And I tell them a story again, and I only share this with parents, but I have a dear friend. He's a wonderful person. He's one of my best friends in the world. I love him if he hears this. I'm talking about it. Um, but he just finished recently finished 100 hours of community service that was court ordered, right? Because he had like a traffic violation, moving violation that was pretty serious, right? And so he's a wonderful person. It doesn't negate, right? That it was court ordered. He had to do it, like that, right? Like that was forced, and that's college is also again that sense of doing things for the sake of um doesn't is sort of a shrug of the shoulders. But students who are doing things because right, if you are service oriented and that really fuels your heart and is the way you love to spend your time, great. But I've worked with plenty of like delightful young people, wonderful young people who didn't do any formal or structured service, right? But they were great. They were wonderful members of our community, and that came through in their application. The application
Right.
process also creates space for character to come through in other ways, not just the choices that you make with your extracurricular life.
I think that's right. Now, I've seen a handful of students that I would consider to be high achieving that are really great at being independent and finding their own opportunities. And their parents just kind of sit back and the student does most things. That's pretty rare, though. And I don't think that we would say that that's always going to happen. There are some circumstances where students might need a little nudge from a parent. They are still getting their feet underneath them. You want to preserve some element of independence, but there can be some, hey, I looked at these 3 summer programs and they seem interesting to me. Which one do you find to be most
Mm-hmm.
interesting? What's the right? I mean, I think probably every student is different, and so there's no prescription, right, that we're going to put out there for parents to follow. But how do you know when you're doing too much in terms of the nudge in a particular direction, and how do you know when you're getting it right and showing students opportunities that are exciting to them?
Yeah. I think parents who approach the process thinking themselves as a coach, right? There to provide tips, to answer questions, that, like insert suggestions. Um, those are the, right? Like, again, seeing this is the process itself is a learning opportunity, right? And frankly, it's also a test of your college readiness. There
Yeah.
are some moving parts in the application process. It does require some relatively sophisticated, administrative and executive functioning skill. But so does going to a highly selective college 12 months later,
Right.
right? And so that's where sort of parents, again, have to see this process as an opportunity for their student, right, to kind of get their sea legs with a project like this. And it's going to trusting, right, that um, that they need to do this, right? Otherwise, right, that they may, yeah, they might short circuit, right, a really
They
important learning
do. Yeah.
and compromise the students, success, which is really demoralizing for semester freshman year to feel like, again, like you're out, you're out of your league because, your well-intentioned parents might have intervened a little too heavily in the administration of the process. When is too far, so I have worked with parents, bless their hearts, who will slip into pronoun usage of we and I when referring to parts of the administration.
Yeah.
That is slipping too far. So, part of this process will challenge your students, for example, to communicate with admissions officers, right? Via email, maybe an alum, if they're having an interview, they might have to send an email. Um, they need to be the one authoring, right?
Yes.
And sending these emails. But it's okay for a 16-year-old to ask mom or dad, like, hey, do you mind editing this? Like, or can you
Sure.
give me some tips?
Yeah.
Because I'm not used to writing a professional email. Like, that's coaching. You writing the email to the admissions office, right, is overstepping and doing your student a disservice.
And with that we language that you pointed out, I sometimes see students start to use that language. And that's really a sign that it's gone too far, right? When a student starts saying, well, next year we're taking AP
Correct.
English, and it's like, no, you're taking that class. That's on you to take it. And so if you start to recognize that in your student where they're considering it to be a collective effort as opposed to their effort, I think
Mm-hmm.
that probably you're too much in that driver's seat, like kind of holding the wheel and steering for them as they're supposed to be driving that car.
Right. And unfortunately, anecdotally, I've had too many experiences of seeing students really struggle. First and second semester, maybe transfer, maybe, again, and that is just demoralizing. And I think again, a missed opportunity when we think about this process. They can manage it, you know, but you can be there to guide them, and insert some guidance without authoring it. I would say, the same is true of the writing of the actual application process itself.
Hmm.
It should be a true reflection of their ability, of their thought, of their critical thinking, like and once we start to tinker too aggressively into the writing, into the crafting of the application, um, you're also overstepping, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I think one of the got to keep in mind still that um, sorry,
I
I
lost
lost.
you
I just thought I got the wrong quick mic shift all of a sudden. We have to keep in mind here that we still do have high achieving students. And so they are poised to be very successful, not just in college, but in life beyond. And there can be certain action here that can be to their detriment, that can actually make it harder for them to be successful in college, that can take away their ability to be independent because we're trying to optimize admission to a particular school. But whenever I meet a student who's already high achieving, I'm less worried about where they go and more interested in supporting their ability to be successful when they get there because they already have all these great tools at their disposal that will allow them to make the most of any educational experience that they have. And so I think it can sometimes be a mistake to prioritize getting into a school as the objective when in fact it's success when you get there that truly matters.
Absolutely. The process, and yeah, blooming where you're planted, right? And that lesson, right? Not overemphasizing that outcome as much as, right, the process. Um, yeah.
I want to ask you words of affirmation, I think could be really helpful and it can be very important coming from parents in this process. And it's a process that goes up and down. There are stresses, there are setbacks sometimes. How can a parent, what are some things that maybe you've seen that just help center the student and let them know, I've got your back, right? Mom and dad are here
Mhm.
to be supportive of you. Um, I think that would be some great advice if we could move to that
Yeah.
space.
Um, I mean, a couple things, being present, right, and caring about the process. I mean, I've definitely worked with, wonderful parents who were engaged and cared about their kids and, checked in periodically, but were otherwise, hands off. I think giving students some space, respecting that they can do it themselves, I think is one affirmation, right? Again, not interfering is affirming our trust in their ability to do, right? Which is important. And I think an important
Right.
affirmation. Um, I, it's having a balanced list is something that I think actually too is something that a parent usually has a little bit more sort of intervention in,
Yeah.
and can be a space where again a parent can kind of be proactive in looking to protect their students' heart in this process, right? I think that's a space where a parent can and should be intentional in understanding the balance on the list, what we're shooting for, um, and keeping things balanced, right? A couple of pieces of bad news. Failure is a good thing in life. Like we all learn from failure, right? And we can all take a couple of pieces of bad news, but a stack of bad news, right, can be also really demoralizing.
Right. Right.
Right. And so that's where being smart, as a family, right, and having some balance, but as a parent, also being vigilant, I think, and making sure that the student is approaching the process with some, like, in a measured way that isn't going to beat them up. Um, okay, which can happen. And I think that's another piece of it, is like understanding that failure is going to come, but we have some control over it as a family, and moderating it, so that it's a little bit more gentle of a process.
Right. I think that ability to see the whole picture and understand those ups and downs will come. It's how you react to them and how you absorb them
Mhm.
as a family that I think makes all the difference. DJ, I think that's helpful wisdom to end on, and really appreciate you coming on the show to talk through some of this today.
My pleasure. It was fun to see you again.
Yeah, it's always great to see you. I'll see you next week too.
Next week.
Next week on the radio show, we're going to be talking about the transfer process, both for students applying to colleges around the country and for the specifics of the California transfer system. We'll also have a special guest on the show, the Director of Financial Aid from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, to talk through certain aspects of financial aid. So we look forward to having you back here again next week. Remember, give us a 5-star rating, subscribe, tell your friends. We're always happy to have more listeners. And in the meantime, have a great February. Happy leap year.